Hey there, welcome. I'm here to help you relax tonight. I know many of you use this video to fall asleep, so before you get too cozy, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'd love to hear from you. Now get cozy, take a deep breath, and let yourself relax. Maybe adjust your pillows. Maybe dim the lights just a touch. Tonight, we'll slip quietly into the world of Cleopatra. But not in a big Hollywood sense, not with trumpets and movie spotlights. No, we're just going to drift easy and slow down the river of her life, like a feather on calm water. Cleopatra 7. Cleopatra. She was Egypt's last pharaoh, born in 69 BCE. She grew up in a family that had ruled the Ptolemaic dynasty for over 200 years. That's a lot of ancestors, all anxious to keep the family line unbroken. Maybe a bit too anxious, if you ask me. Let's just say their idea of family bonding meant marrying each other to keep their genes pure. Weird today, normal then. They thought it preserved their so-called royal blood. Personally, I think it produced some personalities that were, let's say, unusual. But who am I to judge? Cleopatra wasn't just a title on a coin, she was sharp, and people knew it. She mastered several languages, including Egyptian, which was rare in her family. Most of them stuck to Greek. She wasn't only book smart, but also brilliant at handling politics, philosophy, and keeping her cool when things fell apart. When she was about 18, Cleopatra became co-ruler with her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII. Imagine the sibling drama. Except, this wasn't about who ate the last dessert. It was about who wore the crown. And yes, their little throne squabble involved armies, advisors, and a side of assassination plots for good measure. That's intense, right? Let's not dwell there. Picture Cleopatra in a rare, quiet moment. Maybe she's sitting by the Nile, hair a bit messy, plotting how she's going to keep her kingdom running without losing her mind. Maybe she pours herself some wine, scribbles a note on a scroll. Not all drama has to be loud. Oh, and her flair for dramatic entrances? Unbeatable. History says that when Julius Caesar came to Alexandria, Cleopatra had herself smuggled into the palace, rolled up in a rug, or was it a linen sack? Either way, she knew how to make an impression. That's how she told Caesar, "Look, I'm clever, and I know how to pull off a grand entrance." He liked it. Or maybe he was just amazed by how she pulled it off without Instagram. Their relationship was part political, part personal. Cleopatra needed Rome's muscle to keep her throne, and Caesar wanted Egypt steady for his own plans. But in private, you get the sense that Cleopatra could soften the sharp edges of politics, careful conversations in quiet rooms, glances to trusted advisors, small worries about her son, Caesarion, and his place in a future she hoped would be calmer. Caesarion Ptolemy XV, to be official, Little Caesar, to everyone else, was born in 47 BCE. Cleopatra adored him, or at least fiercely wanted him safe from the endless storms of palace intrigue. He grew up with upheaval all around, but I like to think she made sure he still heard stories about Egypt's greatness and had lazy afternoons by the river. Then came chaos. Caesar was murdered in 44 BCE. Cleopatra found herself with a dangerous Roman scene to handle. That's where Mark Antony shows up. Their story, full of excess, love, rivalry, is legendary. But I like the smaller moments. Antony, known for being emotional and a little unpredictable, and Cleopatra, who just wanted to keep things sane. When he threw wild parties complete with too much wine, occasional elephants, and enough drama for weeks, Cleopatra was the calm one, quietly watching, always thinking 3 steps ahead. She understood image. Always. Every coin, every portrait, every public appearance carefully managed to make her look strong and wise. Imagine trying to control your reputation without a single selfie or viral moment. Exhausting, honestly, but Cleopatra was a master. No matter what, she looked collected even when her advisors panicked, Antony argued, or another rival brewed trouble. They had 3 kids. Alexander Helios, Cleopatra Selene, and Ptolemy Philadelphus family life was complicated, no doubt. Cleopatra tried to give them some sense of normalcy, whatever that meant in a palace swirling with gossip and tension. In the end, things got quieter, but not easier. After Antony lost to Octavian, Cleopatra headed back to Alexandria and tried to keep things steady, at least on the surface. People say she stayed calm right through the end, even as her world fell apart. She died in 30 BCE, most likely by her own hand. There's debate about how, but what matters is that, until the very end, Cleopatra kept her dignity. Her legacy isn't just a trail of battles or romances, but the way she carried herself through relentless stress, with smarts, self-control, and a touch of grace. She managed to stay a step ahead, even as things spiraled. That's the part of her story I want you to drift off with tonight. Her quiet strength, steering through waves, always thinking. So now, as you relax, picture yourself gliding into another royal mess, a different time, a different place. Europe, a few centuries later. Here, the royals barely bathe, chocolate is treated like medicine, and every day brings some fresh little scandal. It's going to get interesting. Picture Europe a few centuries later. Royal families shuffling through their grand palaces, not exactly obsessed with bathing, nibbling on chocolate as if it were cough syrup, and always nursing at least one minor scandal a day. The Habsburgs probably did this best. They managed to turn eccentricity into a family tradition, mostly by ignoring the maybe don't marry your cousin part of the marriage rulebook. Power was one motive, sure, but after a while you get the sense it just became a habit. The most famous result? That legendary Habsburg, jaw-heavy, a bit askew, and unmistakable a souvenir from generations of inbreeding. Then there's Charles II of Spain. Born in 1661, he wrapped up the family's reign in Spain. Historians tiptoe around it. But the truth is, Charles lived with a long list of medical issues, almost all courtesy of his family tree instead of good fortune. He was small, delicate, not exactly athletic. Still, he had his own kind of charm. He could spend hours talking about plants or the way shadows crept along the palace walls. His mind wandered through gardens and sunbeams, maybe hoping for a universe where kings could shed their crowns and just breathe for a while. Duty, though it came knocking, and Charles answered. He moved slowly through his endless rituals, advisors whispering reminders while he gazed out a window, quietly wishing he could swap ceremony for cloud watching. Still, he held on, keeping the monarchy going because, like gravity, monarchy just keeps pulling, even when rulers would rather be somewhere else. Inside his court, life buzzed with a gentle kind of mess. Nobles whispered conspiracies, ministers plotted in cloudy corners, and doctors showed up with an armful of herbs and terrible advice. Charles ambled along, making choices when necessary, stirring the pot just enough to keep things calm, sinking into the smaller joys, a good fire, a stashed novel, the softness of palace carpets. Now, cross over to France and peek in on Louis XIV, the Sun King who did things differently. He ran on routine and splendour. Nothing at Versailles escaped his attention, down to the way the sun hit a gilded chair. His days moved in a blur of customs, but he had his slip-ups, a hand trembling during council, an affection for hats that made his courtiers smirk, that little nervous pacing he did before speeches. The people around him learned to adjust, dancing to his rhythm whether they liked it or not. Louis's court could feel like moving through honey, that slow bowing and timed entrances, that endless hush meant to keep everything perfect. But behind all the sparkle, there were winks, rolled eyes, and moments where someone slipped a joke into the monotony. The human side always peeked through. Heading north, you'll bump into Sweden and Gustav III, who ruled in the late 18th century. This was a king who adored theatrics. Not just the kind on stage, though he loved that, but also the political drama. And yet, even he needed peace. Picture Gustav bent over a candlelit letter, strolling on frosty walks through palace gardens, finding a rare, quiet groove in the roaring business of being royal. So you see, the thread tying these royals together isn't the crowns, or the armies, or even the scandals. It's the way their lives, stripped of titles, start to look a little familiar. They worried, they got bored, they snuck pleasures where they could find them. They watched the world drift by, aching for something gentle or amusing in the midst of obligation. Eventually, our path lands in England, with Elizabeth I. Now there was a queen who knew how to manage pressure, politics, whirring, religion boiling, gossip flying. She moved through her days almost like a dancer, precise favouring this robe, that advisor, that garden path. She was particular. If things weren't as she liked, people noticed. But that was her charm. She took long walks, sized up her courtiers with a quiet stare that made them stand a bit straighter. There's a kind of steady peace in her habits. Everything in its place, everything done just so. I like to picture her at dusk, overlooking the Thames, toying with big ideas, alliances, possible marriages. The future of her country may be smirking at the daily nonsense her court delivered. Even surrounded by tension and intrigue, she found slivers of calm, an evening's hush, a funny mishap, the rituals she carved out for herself. Gently, we keep drifting through these lives, Charles, with his fragile hopefulness, Louis and his dazzling control, Gustav with his dramatic soul, Elizabeth in her private world. There's something soothing about it. We're just drifting through their weirdnesses and comforts. No rush, just letting their stories wash over us, soft as water on a quiet shore. We're not in a hurry. We just let their stories wash over us, easy and warm like standing ankle deep in a calm sea. And soon enough, we're wandering into Austria, into the company of Emperor Joseph II. Joseph's one of those figures who feels over-caffeinated by ambition and ideals, but also seems kind of worn out half the time. He ruled in the late 1700s, when the Habsburgs lurked everywhere in Europe, always keeping their marriages in the family, and acquiring a reputation for odd traditions. Joseph took his job seriously. He woke up early, devoured reading and writing, and got down to running the empire with a kind of intense, no-nonsense focus. He wasn't into splashy ceremonies or putting on a show. He liked things clear and efficient. Honestly, that made him feel more like a real person than a caricature of a king. It's easy to picture him in the pale Vienna morning, tea or coffee steaming on the desk, staring through the window and mapping out plans that were both grand and weirdly heartfelt. His private life, though, was a puzzle. He married his cousin Isabella of Parma, which, sure, was standard-issue royal strategy, but hardly a recipe for romance. There was affection, but also strain. They wrote to each other about family gossip, palace drama, that heavy sense of duty you hear so much about. Somewhere, under all that royal weight, they found quiet moments of real connection, tiny sparks of humanity that probably helped them get through. Let's wander over to Russia now, where Catherine the Great ruled with a sharp mind and quirks that are still irresistible to read about. She showed up in Russia as a teenager from Germany, basically an outsider, and within a few years, she ended up empress. Catherine was clever, stubborn, and always strategizing. She dove into philosophy, loved the arts, and even when her courtiers rolled their eyes, followed her own little routines at court. She'd read half the night, scribbling letters that stretched for pages. Sometimes she mulled over what it meant to wield power, Other nights she'd just enjoy these small, reliable pleasures, strolling her gardens, trading secrets with a friend, or sneaking off for a quiet meal when palace life got suffocating. Now, back to France Versailles, specifically where Marie Antoinette flashes onto the scene. Her story's been twisted into both romance and scandal, but really, a lot of her life was ordinary and repetitive. As a teenage bride, she landed smack in the middle of endless protocol, rigid rules and intrusive eyes. So she found her little sanctuaries: music, embroidery, secret gardens, a stolen moment with hot chocolate while sunlight slid across the gilded walls. Everything about her days was scheduled: morning meetings, lessons, ceremonies. But within those routines, she managed to carve out small pieces of peace. Maybe she read a letter from home. Maybe she just watched the light dance across the room. But in those moments, she was just a person, a young woman finding her breath in the middle of chaos. And on we drift. There's King George III of England, juggling a globe-sized empire and his own mental battles, often with a stubborn determination that leaves you both impressed and a little sad. Queen Victoria, who leaned into long carriage rides and endless family letters, trying to summon a kind of order out of royal chaos. Peter the Great, entirely fixated on modernizing Russia, yet still captivated by the quiet of rivers and shipyards. All these royals, famous, infamous, misunderstood, lived inside strict routines and impossible expectations. But look closer, and you'll see the human side: a cup of tea, a secret note, quiet walks, silent moments, studying the changing light. Even behind palaces and ceremony, they reached for comfort in small ways, just like anyone else. So, as our minds wander from one royal life to another, don't rush. Settle into the slow beat of it all, the repetition, the peculiar habits, that stubborn thread of human nature weaving through centuries. It's history at its most gentle, and somehow, the most real. Let your mind wander for a moment, drifting from one royal life to another. There's no need to rush. History unspools at its own patient pace. You start to notice those little routines, repeating strange daily quirks from centuries ago that, somehow, still feel familiar. And if you keep floating, you'll end up in the tangled streets of Renaissance Florence, deep in Medici territory. That world traded more in art and intrigue than outright battles, plenty of gossip over who got which villa, who snatched up the choicest painting, and whose turn it was to broker peace at dinner. Take Lorenzo de' Medici, Lorenzo the Magnificent, as he liked to be called. He wasn't just a power broker, although he could be ruthless when business called for it. Lorenzo loved poetry too, and he loved those lazy afternoons spent thinking quietly, or maybe just watching the city change light as the day went on. For the Medici, legacy was everything it's in: the statues, the faded receipts, the lavish frescoes. But under all that grandeur, Lorenzo cultivated smaller rituals. He would dawdle over letters, turn over gifts in his hands for a while, or slip into a garden that always smelled a little bit like jasmine. In public, he played the grand host. In private, he took things slow, savouring the pieces of life that let him breathe while Florence swirled with drama. Sometimes, I imagine him just standing there, letting the sunlight skip across the Arno River, thinking about how brief life is, how art, at least, tries to outlast the tick of time. It's in those moments that history feels close. Even the most celebrated figures, behind closed doors, had simple habits that pulled them back down to earth. Now, let's meander north, out of Italy and up to Prussia, where Frederick the Great ruled with sharp precision in the 1700s. Here's a king who thrived on routine. He woke early, always the same time, ate fast, pushed through stacks of state duties, and then finally settled in to play his flute or scribble poetry. Despite all that discipline, Frederick found real happiness in little things. A perfect garden, the gentle challenge of trimming a hedge, the warm company of a small group of friends who actually got his jokes. His chambers brimmed with books and maps, everything in its place. War and strategy grabbed the headlines, but inside those quiet rooms, reading and music and reflection kept Frederick steady year after year. There's a kind of quiet beauty there. Life moving in reliable patterns, work and art swirling together, day in and day out, like ripples across a quiet pond. Let's keep drifting, this time toward the heart of the Ottoman Empire. Suleiman the Magnificent, sitting at the centre of it all in the 1500s, moved through life with grace. Yes, he was a lawmaker and a military leader, but his private world was softer. Poetry, elegant buildings, hours spent wandering through lush gardens or debating with advisors. History loves to highlight the big moments, the laws, the conquests. But even Suleiman treasured those quiet spaces, the chance to inhale, to slow down, to simply think while the empire ticked on around him. Travel farther east, and you land in Japan, among the shoguns who lived with a delicate balance of order and ceremony powerful, but never too far from a peaceful tea ritual or 5 minutes spent admiring autumn leaves. Tokugawa Ieyasu, for example, built his power on calm routine. Reflection, tea, the steady passing of seasons. He leaned on those dependable rituals to carry the weight of ruling a nation. Turns out, even the mightiest need time to pause. Trace these habits across continents, Cleopatra on her barge, Catherine the Great with her letters, Charles II pacing his halls, Marie Antoinette at her dressing table. Every one of them leaned on a quiet comfort, a little daily indulgence, something private that helped them manage the burdens of extraordinary responsibility. It's almost funny, really, while history sees their crowns and battles, they clung to the ordinary things just like everyone else. So, as you drift through these stories, let yourself relax into their rhythm. History isn't always noisy and dramatic. Sometimes it's soft. You find the strange, the funny, and the deeply human in how these people lived when no one was really watching. Tonight, you float right alongside them, close enough to feel the hush, catch a whiff of their gardens, and maybe even smile at the quiet peculiarities that make them, well, just people. Tonight, as we keep going, let's just drift with these figures, picking up on the quiet, the odd little quirks, and that sneaky humour you only catch when you step back and really watch life unfold. Imagine us gliding into the late 1600s and early 1700s, landing right in Peter the Great's Russia. Peter's a wild one, obsessed with modernising, fascinated by shipbuilding, desperate to haul Russia into step with the rest of Europe, whether the people were ready or not. He loved the tiny stuff most folks ignore. Measuring angles, poking around carpentry, studying anatomy. He'd drift through workshops with his cloak wrapped around him, quietly checking on the workers, jotting notes, always scheming about how some tiny change might set off ripples across the empire. But hey, even Peter had his routines. Warm baths, long quiet walks, deep moments of thought. He wasn't always in motion. He had favourite rooms, the perfect chairs, mornings that unfolded through rituals only he knew. You can picture him at the end of another day, filled with reforms, just standing by a window, watching the Neva catch the last sunlight, finally letting his chest expand for a calm breath, before more meetings or another surprise problem. Let's jump over to England now. There's George IV, not exactly the king you remember for changing everything, but more for decadent parties and a love of the finer things. Clothes, grand food, and extravagant architecture set the tone. But the guy ran on routine. Dinners at a certain hour, visits that stuck to the minute, a household that moved at his preferred slow, deliberate beat. People around him might have muttered or rolled their eyes, but the king took his time, making the world wait on his clock. Back in Prussia, Frederick William I, the soldier king, leads with discipline and a love of order. He was strict, maybe even a little intimidating. But he had his softer spots. Watching parades of soldiers, walking empty palace halls before dawn, keeping daily routines that, from the outside, seemed nitpicky, but brought him real peace. Repetition, measured steps. The little comforts, he clung to those. Then we drift again, this time into the velvet-lined world of 19th century Europe, meeting Queen Victoria. England's queen ran her court with firm quietness and a streak of oddity. She had rooms she loved, gardens she kept just so, endless letters that shaped her family's world and politics beyond. Still, she cherished calm afternoons, little bursts of music, and familiar domestic routines. Underneath the crown, she chased order, peace, and small joys, like anyone else. Picture her in a sunlit study, pen in hand, writing to her children, the slow slide of shadows across wallpaper, a hint of fresh bread in the air. These details, so simple, let us sense that history isn't just marble and myth, but real, breathing people. Even the ones who steered empires needed quiet moments to keep them going. So, as we drift from century to century, palace to palace, riverbank to riverbank, we keep seeing the same thing. People searching for stillness, building little pockets of comfort, holding on to their personal habits, even with the weight of the world overhead. These moments, the quiet sighs, the small daily rituals, private gardens, this is where history turns gentle and close. Right here, if you look, you can spot the real humans behind all those crowns and titles, floating calmly through the ages. There's something quietly comforting about history's backstage, hidden in the sighs, familiar routines, and secret gardens of people who, on the surface, ruled the world. Underneath the crowns and ceremonies, you find these small moments where everything slows down. That's where you really hear the human side, humming along beneath all the grandeur. Let's turn to Louis XV of France for a moment. He lived in the 1700s, surrounded by fancy rituals and more than a little luxury enough to make any courtier raise an eyebrow now and then. But Louis wasn't a showman like his great-grandfather, Louis XIV. He leaned into comfort and quiet. Think slow mornings, lots of reading, lazy walks through the Versailles gardens, and a fondness for a little harmless mischief. He liked hunting, sure, but he also loved music, and the easy predictability of his daily routine inside rooms, expertly arranged for his comfort. His days began gently. You'd see him leafing through letters, watching staff glide through their tasks, maybe grinning at some small mistake during a ceremony, a stumble, a missed signal. He didn't mind errors. He just let them pass, usually with a half smile. Even when you're king, those little bits of amusement matter. Now let's shift east, back to the Habsburgs, and meet Maria Theresa, one of the rare women to rule the Holy Roman Empire on her own. She balanced everything, the machinery of government, her brood of children, and alliances that seemed to need mending daily. But Maria Theresa wasn't just about duty. She wrote long letters to her kids, strolled through palace gardens, filled her life with music, and sometimes just paused with a cup of tea, soaking up the afternoon sun. Those quiet minutes gave her the strength to face the pressure finely measured breaks in a schedule that never really stopped. Modern life could take a tip or two from her. Head north, and the scene gets more tangled. King Christian VII in Denmark, late 1700s. His court was a maze of intrigues, and his mind wasn't always at ease. Still, he clung to his little havens, reading quietly, listening to music, walking the corridors on his own terms. Over and over, these simple habits helped him keep his balance. Jump further, and the rhythm holds. In the Ottoman Empire, long after Suleiman the Magnificent, his heirs ran an empire held together by spectacle and structure. But even sultans needed to breathe. They strolled through gardens, listened to poets, watched evening fall against palace stones, or got lost in their own thoughts. Power didn't erase the need for quiet pleasures, it just made them harder to find. Across all these centuries and palaces, from Versailles to Vienna, St. Petersburg to Istanbul, you see the same thing. The people in charge, no matter how powerful, always found time for the small stuff. Writing late at night by candlelight, walking alone among the roses, sitting by a window daydreaming, letting music fill a silent room. These tiny habits calmed the chaos, the heartbeat inside the palace walls. When you look past the statues and ceremonial portraits, you find these soft details. A king's secret amusement, a queen's quiet tea, the letters and walks and gentle rituals that made ruling bearable. That's where history gets real, where all the crowns and empires melt into something completely, basically human. And honestly, that's what makes these stories worth remembering at all. Even with the weight of crowns and empires, life's small pleasures stubbornly shine through. There's always some gentle rhythm or quiet habit that helps people slog through the day, even if those people happen to be royalty. Let's slip into the odd little world of Charles VI, Holy Roman Emperor. The man ruled in the early 1700s and took duty to an extreme. Meticulous records, strict protocol, never missing a detail. Sometimes it must have driven everyone else mad. But underneath all that formality, Charles had his own soft edges. He'd wander the echoing palace corridors, watching sunlight play on ancient tapestries, or taking in the way the gardens shifted with the seasons. These tiny, personal rituals gave him a calm oasis in the middle of diplomatic storms. Family life wasn't much different. A carousel of managed children, planned marriages, endless worry about who'd inherit what. But even with everything scheduled to the minute, Charles carved out time for himself. A hot cup of tea, a quick daydream at the window, little moments of music stolen in his private rooms. Those small rituals kept him grounded when everything else pulled him in 10 directions at once. If we head west a bit, there's Charles II of England, his days marked by frail health, political drama, and shadows that never quite left him. Even so, he had his comforts. He'd sit with trusted friends for quiet conversations, spend evenings reading in peace, or find comfort in the company of pets and keepsakes. The outside world might have been chaos, but his inner world thrived on gentle routines. Then we cross to France and spot Louis XVI on the edge of revolution. He was reserved, thoughtful, often burdened by a role that would have crushed most people. Still, Louis found refuge in his workshop, losing himself in carpentry, or wandering the gardens, or pouring himself into letters. These little rituals didn't just fill time, they gave him space to breathe when history closed in. And why not drift forward to Napoleon? Outside, he was relentless, commanding armies, shaping Europe, a force of nature. Behind closed doors, though, he lived by a clock, always up early, reading, scribbling letters, pondering the next move. Even on the road, he set up an orderly little world for himself, with a tidy desk and reliable schedule. For all his legendary ambition, maybe it was that daily discipline that truly fueled him. Glance over to Russia for a moment, you'll find Alexander I, carrying the weight of his empire, but always searching for peace. He would walk, soak in music, scribble in his diary. There's the trace of someone quietly threading his way through duty, needing gentle anchors to keep his balance. Meanwhile, Austria's Francis I, Maria Theresa's husband, ran his household with careful precision, convinced that even the smallest habit could tip the scales of an empire. What does all this add up to? It's plain, really. Under all the ceremony behind the power, there's a simple truth. Leaders clung to gentle routines, walks in dew-soaked gardens, letters dashed off by candlelight, the hush of a morning cup of tea. These minor rituals gave them calm and control, tethering them to something steady in worlds that spun too fast. So drift back through these chapters of history, and you'll see the grand and the ordinary are never that far apart. Even in the lives marked by duty and restlessness, there's always a quiet interlude, a moment of comfort or self-reflection. And sometimes, those tiny moments are the ones that make us feel closest to the people who wore the crowns. They invite us to pause, breathe, and let our minds wander right alongside theirs. Let's wander a little through history, lingering in the quieter corners you don't usually see in the portraits or big, dramatic stories. Take Queen Anne of Great Britain, early 1700s. Her reign always comes packaged with words like sorrow or burden, and, honestly, it's not wrong her life leaned heavy. She struggled with illness, lost loved ones, and shouldered the responsibility of bringing England and Scotland together. But even with all that weight, Anne clung to the small things that made her feel safe. She found comfort in routines, sitting quietly with a book, flipping through old letters, or spending lazy afternoons surrounded by people she trusted. In these small havens, she found relief from everything that waited outside those doors. Anne also had her quirks, little bits of fussiness that, in truth, were just very human. She kept her rooms just so, clocked her tea and pastries like clockwork, and liked things orderly. Maybe her advisors found these things strange or trivial, but no matter. They gave structure to her days, and a bit of calm in a world that rarely offered either. Even when decisions about wars or treaties stormed outside, she always had these anchoring habits. Let's drift south for a minute, to Spain's Charles III. He comes alive in the 1700s a stickler for order, but also fiercely devoted to making life better for his people. Charles kept a strict daily schedule. Up with the sun, straight to state matters, then a retreat for personal reflection. He found moments for himself, books, strolls in the garden, quiet observations of life swirling around him. These little rituals brought balance, keeping him sane when leadership threatened to overwhelm. Now, swing over to Austria, and there's Francis II, last emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. The Napoleonic era was chaos, but you wouldn't always know it if you looked closely at Francis's daily life. He clung to private letters, solitary walks, and structured routines that gave him clarity and held the madness at bay. In the end, it was these small, repeated actions that gave him footing. Up in Prussia, there's Frederick William III, nephew to Frederick the Great. He showed up in a Europe that was bent out of shape after Napoleon. You'd think the uncertainty would drive anyone nuts, but he kept it together with steady routines. Measured mornings, orderly walks, time set aside just for thinking or reading. The world might spin, but his day-to-day life kept a steady, familiar beat. Now, cross over the Atlantic and visit George Washington. Here's a guy you always picture in uniform or on a dollar bill, but he had his own steady rhythm too. He woke up early, patrolled Mount Vernon, exchanged letters with his advisors, and spent hours walking the land. Still, even with a packed schedule, he made time for books and reflection, a space for quiet in a world of revolution. Back in Europe, meet Paul I of Russia after Catherine the Great. People called him eccentric, but he was really just devoted to his own routines. Walks at set times, meals served in just the right order, everything ticking along with precision. His patterns could be frustrating for those around him, but they gave him calm and a sense of control when so much was complicated and uncertain. Picture him pausing between meetings, staring out at drifting sunlight, letting himself breathe even for just a moment. We keep drifting. The 19th century brings Louis-Philippe of France, the citizen king. His era wasn't exactly peaceful, but even with all that pressure, he created room for walks, reading, and simply watching life unfold outside his window. It was about holding on to everyday calm, keeping the turbulent world at arm's length for a while. Cross the world again, and there's Emperor Meiji of Japan. Massive changes swirled around him, new industries, new ways of life, but his own day was anchored by quiet rituals. Rising early, engaging in ceremonial observance, carving out space for personal reflection. Across every border and language, rulers came back to the same idea. Small, steady routines help them carry impossible loads. Step back for a moment, and something becomes clear. Power, titles, wars, sure, they're obvious. But what really ties all these leaders together? The tiny patterns, the gentle, familiar things that made each day bearable. Queen Anne's tea breaks, Frederick William III's walks, George Washington reading at sunrise, Meiji's quiet mornings. It's almost meditative to look at it all this way. So if you picture history as a winding river and float alongside these rulers, notice those small pleasures, those private habits that got them through. Their lives weren't just dates and battles, they were slow, steady motions, little rituals. And as you drift along with them, you might find yourself slipping into that patient rhythm too, letting the grand stories fade and finding peace in the details that held it all together. Let that easy rhythm carry us. It's like the hush that settles over a grand old palace when the last candle finally flickers out. Now, slip with me into the early 1900s. George V is there, calm in the middle of all that swirling history. The world outside was restless, changing fast, but inside, he stuck to what he knew. Regular meals, predictable days. The security of the same four walls, each morning looked just like the last. Newspapers lined up in perfect rows, letters waiting in neat little piles. Somewhere in that sameness was a kind of comfort, a way to believe that while the world churned beyond the palace, some things could still feel steady and familiar. Not so far off, Meiji Emperor had already steered Japan through massive change. All the drama of modernization, the rush of a nation finding its modern shape, but if you stepped inside his world, you'd see gentle daily rituals settling everything back into place. Ceremonies unfolded with careful grace. Solitude became part of each day's design. Even as everything changed, there's something eternal in the way people crave stillness and a sense of order. Look a little further, and here's Wilhelm II. Everyone thinks of his boldness, maybe even his ego. But tucked into the formality of his life, you'll find routines. Morning rounds, set meetings, hours spent quietly sorting through reports. These small, repeated habits ran underneath all the noise, giving him a kind of hidden stability. Head west again. Theodore Roosevelt bursts onto the scene. Loud, energetic, relentless. People remember his vigour, but he too built his days on solid groundwork. Early starts, sharp walks, sacred time for books and letters. That rhythm gave him balance, even with all that energy crackling around. Then there's Nicholas II, living in a world teetering on the edge. He had heavy duties and plenty to worry about, but he managed to carve out peaceful moments, family time, gentle strolls, the soothing routines that made the unpredictable feel a little less threatening. So we drift, past those familiar faces, further into the quiet corners of history. Over continents, through centuries, all kinds of people anchor themselves in gentle repetition. A walk at the same hour, reading from a favoured chair, letters crafted with practised care. Those tiny acts, they might seem small, but they're everything. In the chaos of life, they plant us firmly in the moment. They're like slow, steady breaths, helping each day to unfold with a kind of peaceful regularity. Maybe you start to sense that rhythm, even now. The sound of footsteps crunching on gravel, the soft shiver of a letter pulled open. Maybe a clock in the background, quietly counting the hours. All of it blends together, soft, even, and unhurried. So let's not rush. Let the names and dates blur a little, like distant shapes in the dusk. What matters is that feeling the rhythm, calm and unbroken, guiding us along. And in that quiet, we can just drift. Let history's routines hold us, gently, floating onward toward rest. Let's let history blur at the edges for a moment. The hard facts and drama slipping out of focus, so what's left is just the slow pulse of daily life. Picture Haile Selassie first. He started most days wrapped in silence, alone and unhurried before the calls for leadership came knocking. He'd pray, sit quietly, and soak in those gentle hours before duty took over. Even at the centre of power, he carved out soft, solid ground for himself in the early stillness. Then, we float west and land in one of FDR's mornings. The pressures, wars, crises, depression always loomed, but even he clung to certain rhythms. Mornings paging through letters, afternoons packed with meetings, and now and then an evening unspooling into quiet talk or private thought. Inside the chaos, he made room for small pauses, a moment to breathe, to gather, to remember he was still just a person. All right, now glide on to King George VI. He lived under a gaze that expected composure, even when that didn't come naturally. So he practiced again and again his speeches, his routines, quietly shaping confidence out of repetition. There's something so familiar in that, isn't there? Most of us need a pattern to look steady, at least on the outside. Keep drifting, and you'll find Emperor Hirohito. The imperial timetable ticked along, filling his days with rituals. Yes, but there was space. 2 studying fish, watching the delicate life of the sea, learning, observing. His responsibilities didn't shut out curiosity. Inside all those ceremonies, he found little windows for wonder, for focus, for peace. Head toward the present, and Queen Elizabeth II's world comes into view. Routine was stitched into every day. Morning news, afternoon duties, some quiet time in the evening. But she kept comfort, closer walk with the dogs, repeated traditions, the anchor of things that never changed. Those small, familiar acts, she leaned on them again and again, especially when life spun wild out there in the open. At this point, the pattern's hard to ignore. This isn't random. It's something deep, something all these lives share. Through centuries, across borders, in chaos and calm, people shape their days with rhythm. Not grand, not bold, just small, regular things, simple actions grounding each sunrise to the next. A cup set in its place, a window nudged open, a few steps outside, tracing the same old path. That's what lasts. Soon, even history's loudest voices just whisper, slipping away until it all feels less like a story, more like a half-remembered lullaby. No urgency, no rush, just moments unfolding, soft and slow. So we let ourselves drift on, carried by that easy rhythm further, quieter, until we find ourselves settling into calm, into peace, into rest. And as that gentle calm continues, we can let everything soften just a little more, like the quiet moments just before evening settles in. We drift forward without effort into more recent times, where the rhythm of daily life continues in familiar, steady patterns. We notice Barack Obama, whose days, though carefully scheduled, often followed a consistent flow. Mornings that began in a familiar way, time set aside for reading and reflection, and a structured pace that guided each day forward. Even within a very busy role, there were small, repeated moments that created a sense of balance. Nearby, we find Angela Merkel, known for her calm and methodical approach. Her routine was shaped by preparation, consistency, and quiet focus. Regular habits, careful planning, and a steady daily rhythm helped maintain clarity. There is something comforting in that how consistency can create a sense of ease, even in complex situations. Drifting gently onward, we come to Emperor Akihito. His days followed a thoughtful and measured structure, shaped by tradition and quiet reflection. Time spent on simple, repeated practices created a calm and steady flow. one that moved gently from one moment to the next. And as we continue, we notice King Carl XVI, Gustav, whose life blends public duty with private routine. Even within a modern setting, there are still familiar patterns, morning preparations, scheduled activities, and quiet moments in between. These small repetitions create a steady rhythm that carries each day forward. As we move along this soft current, something becomes even clearer. Time changes, places change, but the rhythm remains. A simple morning, a familiar routine, a quiet pause between moments. These are the things that stay. And now, as everything slows again, the details begin to soften. The names become lighter. The images fade into gentle impressions. The structure of each day becomes a quiet, flowing pattern, like a calm breeze moving through an open window, like the steady ticking of a distant clock, like the soft turning of pages, one after another. There is no need to follow closely, no need to hold on to any single moment. Just the gentle rhythm, continuing, steady, calm. And as we drift a little further, even that rhythm begins to feel softer, slower now, quieter now, until everything settles into a smooth and peaceful flow, carrying us gently onward, without effort, without urgency, only calm, only ease. And as that calm, steady flow continues, we can allow everything to become even lighter, as though the rhythm itself is gently guiding us forward. We drift without effort into the present day, where the patterns of life continue in quiet, familiar ways. We notice Narendra Modi, whose days often begin early, shaped by routine and structure. There is a steady rhythm morning preparation, scheduled work, and moments set aside for reflection. Even within a full day, these repeated patterns create a sense of order. Not far away, we find Sheikh Hasina, whose daily life also follows a consistent flow. Regular schedules, careful planning, and familiar habits guide each day forward. These small, repeated actions form a quiet structure beneath everything else. Drifting gently onward, we come to King Charles III. His days are shaped by long-established routines, morning briefings, scheduled engagements, and moments of quiet in between. Even within a very public role, there are still simple patterns that bring a steady rhythm to each day. And as we continue, we notice Fumio Kishida, whose schedule moves with a calm and measured pace. Meetings, preparation, and thoughtful pauses between tasks create a balanced flow, one that continues steadily from morning to evening. As we follow this gentle current, the pattern becomes unmistakable. Across places, across time, across different lives, the same quiet rhythm remains. A familiar start to the day, a sequence of small, repeated actions, a steady movement from one moment to the next. And now, everything begins to soften once more. The names grow distant, the details fade into quiet shapes. The rhythm becomes the only thing that remains. Slow, steady, gentle, like a soft breeze moving through still air, like the distant ticking of time, like a calm, continuous flow that carries everything forward. There is nothing to follow now, nothing to hold on to, only this steady, peaceful motion. And as we drift a little further, slower, softer, quieter, until even the sense of movement fades, and everything rests in a calm, gentle stillness. And as that gentle stillness settles in, we can allow everything to become even quieter, softer at the edges, lighter with each passing moment. We drift now beyond names and titles into something more simple, more familiar. A quiet room at the start of the day, soft light entering through a window, the faint sound of the world beginning, far in the distance. There is a rhythm here too, not of schedules or responsibilities, but of small, everyday moments. A cup placed gently on a table, a chair pulled back without sound, a slow breath, steady and calm. These are the same patterns that have always existed. Across time, across places, across countless lives, simple routines, repeating quietly. And as we follow this softer rhythm, everything continues to slow. No need to think about history now. No need to remember names or places. Just the feeling of calm repetition, the steady flow of one moment into the next, like pages turning on their own, like footsteps that fade before they are heard, like time moving gently, without effort. And even those images begin to soften, becoming quieter, lighter, more distant, until there is almost nothing left to notice. Just a calm, steady presence. Slow, soft, ERC. No beginning, no end, only this quiet, gentle stillness. And here, everything can simply rest.